ongoing endeavors to educate the citizens of America, we decided it was time to produce another video bringing to you all of the evidence documenting the complete betrayal and invasion of America. Your host will be Bob Fletcher, Special Investigator for the Militia of Montana. Bob was a victim of the Iran-Contra affair. Members of Ollie North's team took over Bob's puppet factory in order to ship arms and missiles illegally out of America. After Bob blew the whistle, he had 2 attempts on his life, one of which put him in intensive care. Bob became a federal witness in the Iran-Contra affair and also was an investigative researcher in the Noriega hearings. Bob ran a strong political campaign in Florida to represent his district in the House of Representatives. Bob now works full-time with the Militia of Montana, acting as one of our leading spokesmen, and remains in touch with congressional offices on a daily basis.
Liftoff.
Many people think of the Iran-Contra affair in terms of Nicaragua and fighting communism. To them, Oliver North is a hero. Bob Fletcher thinks differently. Until last year, Bob Fletcher ran a company that made cute, furry puppets. That was before his company was taken over by an international arms smuggling ring, a ring now linked to Oliver North. Unit 2 investigative reporter John McPherson has the story.
Oliver North, facing charges of lying to Congress, came to Central Florida to support a candidate's congressional bid. 1 year ago, North sat before a congressional committee investigating arms sales and illegal support of Nicaraguan guerrillas. His testimony made him a cult hero to some. And he's getting rich. North's endorsements cost Congressman Connie Mack, for instance, $37,000. But North and his cohorts cost Bob Fletcher a lot more.
I had my company stolen from me.
Fletcher isn't a politician. He's a small businessman who watched everything he had destroyed.
Hey.
With fur and spring, Bob Fletcher built a toy animal and pandered it into a growing company called The Animal Factory, located at this office park in suburban Atlanta. Bob's animals sold like hotcakes at amusement parks. An Atlanta TV show ran a feature.
We got the idea and started doing it.
And Bob thought his dreams had come true when a holding company bought the Animal Factory and kept him on to run it. But slowly, Bob realized the men who bought his company made toys in the front room and ran an international arms smuggling operation from the back.
We received coded messages on the telex from the various parts of the world that had nothing to do with places we were dealing with, such as Pakistan and foreign countries, Angola, Geneva, Switzerland, places like that.
Some telexes weren't even coded. Like this one, the Animal Factory got about the sale of Hercules military transport planes.
The next things were that we were having visitations from military generals. We're talking retired 3-, 4-star major generals coming in. They would come in, they would have closed-door meetings, quick scurrying trips off to foreign countries.
The whole operation was run by this man, Gary Best, and Best wasn't caring for the toy company. He was bleeding it dry.
Finally, I went in and I just confronted Gary Best, and I said, let's not pull my leg anymore. How are you making the money that apparently is taking place here? And without batting an eye, he said, we sell armament.
From that point on, Best was open in his dealings. Bob set in on phone calls and conversations.
He came by my desk, my office area, and just threw a 4-color brochure on my desk, which was similar to this one, and said that we're going to start handling these.
It was a brochure for a Hellfire missile. Hellfire is an armor-piercing anti-tank missile made here in Orlando by Martin Marietta. Hellfire is available only to the United States Army.
I was overwhelmed, I guess is probably the best word. I just couldn't, and it was so out in front.
Meanwhile, Bob's toy company was failing. The icing on the cake came when Gary Best asked Bob if he'd like to make $2,000 a trip as a courier to Angola.
I was told that if I spoke to the wrong people, that there was a good chance that I would be killed.
Right then, Bob knew he had to get out.
This had changed a local toy manufacturer in Marietta into some kind of a James Bond situation, and that was something I certainly wasn't going to get into.
Bob abandoned his now nearly bankrupt company. He fled here to Orlando. But that is hardly the end of his story. In our next report, Bob Fletcher's part in the Iran-Contra investigation. John McPherson, News Center 2.
How did an innocent toy maker wind up as a front for international arms dealers? Well, that's what the toy maker wondered. Here's Unit 2's John McPherson with Part 2 of toy maker Bob Fletcher's tale of intrigue.
Basically, I just had my company stolen by somebody. I feel the same towards him as I would to a guy that pulled out of the shadows and put a gun to my head and stole all of my money on the street.
Bob Fletcher is talking about this man, Gary Best. Best's company, Vista, bought Bob's Atlanta toy business. But soon after, Bob found Vista dealt in toys of war, selling missiles and cargo planes, parading retired military officers through, taking mysterious phone calls and making panicked trips to Washington and all over the world.
Vista even asked Bob to be a courier to Angola. Best said the arms dealing was all legal, and in fact, when Bob reported it to the FBI did nothing. All the while, Bob's company was being milked dry.
I'm a guy that used to entertain children with little toy puppets, and now, on the other hand, I'm being dragged into the middle of some kind of international mercenary and arms operation. It was just amazing.
When Best threatened to kill him, Bob decided to get out.
He reached into his vest pocket and said, "Now, if you ever talk to anyone about this," and he pulled out his hand in the shape of a gun, aimed it directly at my head, and then pulled the pretend trigger of the gun.
Bob fled to Orlando to start over. But months later, familiar names began to surface in the news, connected to something called Iran scam.
All of the same characters, or at least some of the characters that they were dealing with, were the characters that were in my company.
Once again, Bob decided to tell his story. The Iran-Contra committee sent 2 investigators to listen, but Bob says they did nothing.
And at the finish of the interview, it was sort of like, well, thanks a lot. You did a good job. Thanks for talking to us. Now you can forget about it.
They very much wanted to have the show quickly without all the tedious work of the investigation.
One of the investigators was Tom Polgar, an ex-CIA agent who lives in Maitland. Polgar claims the investigation was rushed. Congress wanted it on TV in a hurry and limited it to only diversion of Iranian arms sale profits to Contras. Bob's story didn't deal with that.
And we didn't find that their allegations were relevant to our inquiries.
Bob calls that a whitewash and was angry when he learned Polgar was in Vietnam with many of those he was investigating.
It's like having Charles Manson investigated by one of his followers.
And as he learned more about the Iran-Contra scandal, information fell together like pieces of a puzzle. For instance, Bob realized the day Best made his panicked trip to Washington was the day mercenary Eugene Hassenfuss was shot down over Nicaragua. But the clincher was this, a page from Oliver North's notebooks showing the flow of money and weapons through front companies. One company caught Bob's attention, Toyco.
I don't know, I'm just positive that it was a spin-off, Hey Toys. That was a real joke, I think, that they were using my toy company as a front.
Tomorrow, Bob Fletcher's part in a nationwide lawsuit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. John McPherson, News Center 2. In this small office building in suburban Atlanta, Bob Fletcher's toy company was ruined by men who bled it dry.
I just had 5 years of my life blown right down the tubes.
But Bob's is not the typical story of a small businessman gone bust. The men who ruined his company were arms smugglers, most of them former U.S. military and intelligence officers. Bob fled to his native Florida after they threatened to kill him. But when Bob watched the Iran-Contra scandal unfold on television, he watched men who'd frequented his office testify to Congress, especially this man, retired Army General John Singlaub, who admits being part of the Contra resupply effort.
Bob Fletcher just got burned.
Rick Ryan is an attorney for the Christic Institute, a national legal foundation. The Institute filed suit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. The suit charges men like Singlaub broke the law for years, illegally funding anti-communist activities around the globe. The Christic Institute uncovered evidence of gun running, drug smuggling, embezzlement, murder, and the repeated ruination of innocent people like Bob Fletcher.
Bob Fletcher has probably the most innocuous business you can possibly imagine, a puppet company selling toys at an amusement park. And yet, If you think about it, if you're a covert operative and you want to front, can you imagine a better operation than that?
The Christic Institute suit was thrown out of court this month, though the Institute is appealing, and there is talk of throwing out criminal charges against Oliver North. Vista is closed, Bob's company is gone. And Bob wonders, maybe some can break the law and get away with it, even be called heroes. Yet he refuses to give up.
I absolutely feel it as a personal obligation. I mean, it's just, I brought my children up under the idea that if you see a crime taking place, or you see something that's wrong, report it.
I think that's very impressive. I think that requires a lot of moral fiber, and that is my definition of a hero, someone who can do that, who can stand all by himself, as Bob Fletcher did for a long time, and say, but I'm not going to stop talking about this until I see that justice has been done.
John McPherson, News Center 2.
Thank you for that introduction there, and as a matter of fact, to add a little bit more to that brief introduction, if you can imagine what took place as we pursued bad guys, so to speak, my lawyer and I, after being involved directly with the Iran-Contra business, we started supplying several congressional and senatorial investigations with information, and as we flipped over rocks in our own situation, which was relative to the toy factory, they actually classified, as you can see here with this document, they classified the toy factory information as a national security threat. I guess that's probably on the premise that if those little furry animals got out and started running through the community, we would be in real trouble. But what it did actually, of course, is put us into a situation where we could not pursue any legal action because it was classified national security interest. So pretty well put a stop, and that was their intention, was to put a stop on the information. Nonetheless, we kept going, and we moved forward with other investigative inquiries, which included, as was mentioned, the Noriega case. I dealt information relative to the BCCI banking scandals, the Senator Kerry's investigations on drugs and corruption in the United States. And amazingly enough, it dawned on me at a certain point in time, back in the 80s still, that what was going on was all these random bits and pieces of unconstitutional, illegal acts connected to our congressmen and our senators, and that in fact all of it was going into a single direction. That direction is one world socialism and the New World Order, to use George Bush's quote. The New World Order and one world socialism goes back many, many years. And what's taking place now in the United States is, in fact, what I would call the end of baking a cake that's taken the corrupted persons in the world that want to put us into the New World Order, has taken them about 40 years to accomplish, where they are now about to put the icing on the cake. And basically that's what the presentation is today. Some of the information, documentation, and live footage that you will see on this tape will really surprise and shock those of you that are not up to speed as to what's going on. Amazingly, in some of our investigative research that we were doing, we came across a book that was actually, there's 3 or 4, but one of them happens to be a book that was completed 40 years ago. As you can see it here, the title of the book is The United Nations Exposed. And this was written cooperatively at that time, 40 years ago, with a couple of senators and congressmen at that point in time. And bewildering as it may be, especially for those folks out there that love to just say, well, this is conspiracy talk, this is a conspiracy freaks that are chasing these things, etc. And that certainly is not the case when, in fact, you can find a complete outline for the threat of New World Order, one world socialism in the United States and worldwide. You can come across that outline that's actually been laid down for you 40 years ago. As you can see here also, the table of contents of this particular book is amazing unto itself. It includes the description of disarming the United States. It includes telling and describing the fact that they will put us under the United Nations. They will unite the churches into a one world one world, new world order church that will pretty much, it sort of throws everything into one big bucket from a religious point of view, so that the religions become united, and then all of this, by the way, falling under the United Nations banner. Pretty scary, because what happens is the total elimination of the sovereign rights, not only of individual Americans, but the sovereign rights of the United States of America. And it would completely eradicate our normal Bill of Rights that we commonly live under, and that's maintained our freedom under the Constitution of the United States for 200 years. It's really amazing when you realize that a point in time right now has come about where our Congress is apparently going along with it for the most part. Our president, of course, utilizing executive orders to do as he wishes and sidestepping constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights and our Constitution relative to the checks and balances of the United States Constitution. Some of the more amazing parts, I guess, of the information that we found that goes back 40 years is the fact that actually people's names, persons that were carrying this out, were brought out in the book. And some of those very same folks are now at the helm, if you will, steering us into a new world order. The one world, new world order, one world government, which will be under the UN flag, comes to us from several directions. The invasion, if you will, is a paperwork invasion, which includes scurrilous, unconstitutional bills that are being passed, such as the crime bill eliminating the Second Amendment, totally sidestepping the Second Amendment. It also comes in the paperwork side of the war in terms of altering and changing our educational system, actually introducing books, new books, brand new books that leaves out huge amounts of the American history. It also includes, as I mentioned, the worst of it, I suppose, besides also the financial trickery, which we have witnessed recently with Bill Clinton utilizing executive orders, where he actually sidestepped once again the Senate and the Congress and spun some $20 billion to Mexico under the NAFTA trade agreement. The amazing GATT trade agreement, which, believe it or not, documented the GATT trade agreement documented as probably one of the major steps 40 years ago, folks. 40 years ago, the GATT trade agreement was totally discussed at that time. So it goes back a long ways, and it was pre-planned as part of the progressive steps to eradicate the Constitution of the United States. The GATT trade agreement, which was signed recently, is 200 individual acts of treason by the Senate and the Congress. Inside the GATT trade agreement is literally 200 individual treaties. The GATT trade agreement is 27,000 pages long. No one has gone over and reviewed the entire GATT trade agreement. It's a physical impossibility of a standing congressman. Yet they did pass it. Well, they passed it in a manner such, as a matter of fact, to get a little bit into the specific points on the GATT trade agreement, at this point, no Justice Department judge, no judges, or no judiciary any longer is capable of doing a judgment on an international trade conflict. If there is an international trade conflict at this point in time, they must go to the World Trade Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. And it must be then adjudicated under the World Trade Organization. There are 123 nations as part of that World Trade Organization that have individual voting rights to vote equal to ours. And even though the United States may constitute 10, 20, 100-fold in commercial productivity compared to certain other nations, those other nations still have a single vote equal to the United States single vote. If they have a conflict, for example, with a large wood-producing company, 3 or 4 small nations can vote, in fact, against the export or importation of that wood products from the United States, and it would be all over. That company, other than some private separate negotiations, that wood company would no longer be able to ship, for example, into, let's say, an oriental state someplace. So the fact that you have 200 varieties of trade agreements inside the unbelievable GATT agreement that's now done, each one of those, by normal congressional and constitutional law, are to be adjudicated and judged and read and actually voted upon and passed by 2/3 of the Congress, or excuse me, the Senate. They didn't do that, folks. They just threw it all under one big umbrella and passed it. The financial theft of the BCCI scandals of a few years back, which are being paid back now by taxpayers, that money disappeared. Ed Koch, a mayor, former mayor and congressman from New York, written me a letter a while back and pointed out that by the time they are completed on restitution on that, it will probably cost taxpayers $3 trillion. As we sit right now, I believe it's something like $300 million in the interest being paid back alone on the restitution to correct the BCCI thievery. So that's another financial fraud pulled on the American people, and of course, again, part of the what I refer to as the paper war against the United States citizens, moving us into the one world government. Well, the big question, of course, is when you're talking about how far back it goes. As I mentioned, we have documents back 40 years. In 1961, an interesting thing took place. In 61, there was literally several meetings put together at a high-level national security level, as well as meetings with the United Nations. And in 61, there was an agreement for a 30-year, three-part plan. As you can see here with this this picture that you see now, this is directly taken from the National Security Summary for the year of 61. And we are at the very bottom of that plan for the 30 years. And if you can see on the paperwork here, it points out and says, calls for the disarmament of the United Nations, or excuse me, of the United States under the UN control. And it shows that all arms now, at the end of this 30-year time, would be strictly in the hands of the law enforcement agencies and the United Nations one world government. Amazingly enough, there was a book done back in the 60s that carried out and had an entire list. And as you can see here, this was done by Gary Allen. This particular one calls for a world tax system, which, by the way, I must mention, part of the GATT trade agreement was, in fact, a tax number is now federally mandated on all newborn children in the United States, and that's part of the GATT trade agreement. It's not called a Social Security number, as a matter of fact, it is called a tax number. And as you can see on this next little overlay here, that you can see that they are now, several years later, calling for that United Nations tax. They also call for the World Court, a World Army, which I have to point out was done by George Bush, finally created by George Bush, as part of the war against Hussein, which of course in reality never produced much at all other than injuring and affecting the lives of some 30,000 American soldiers from an unknown chemical attack. But what it did do for the New World Order was create what was one of their requirements, and that was the creation of a world army. They also called for a world central bank, as you can see, the world common currency, a world welfare state, the compulsory worldwide economic planning structure, which would of course fall under a world parliament, which is also totally outlined, the abolition of the private firearms, which they are now doing with unconstitutional law, mandatory population control, and the control of education, which are, of course, moving, and as far as education is concerned, they have in reality dummied down the United States progressively in 30 and 40 years. The amazing figure at this point in time is that we are 14th in the United States is 14th in education in the world. There are some little tiny nooks and crannies where places that you may not even be able to pronounce the names of their countries, that you could in fact send your children and have them come out at a higher intelligence level coming into the 9th grade than you do in the United States. That cannot have happened by error or accident. That's not an oversight. Additionally, there's some other really bizarre bits and pieces that were mandated back in 1976. Presented on the floor of the United States Senate and Congress was Harlan Cleveland. This fellow had been involved with the Kennedy and Johnson administration many years back. But in 1976, as part of the congressional record, he said that we will move into the United Nations One World Planetary Bargain. Does not sounds like a basement bargain to me. But what these fellows laid out in congressional record was that they wanted to create the World Food Bank, provide for international control of all sources and supplies, the internationalization of commodity markets, which of course they're doing with the merging of all of European markets, the final slow merger of all the money of the United States, the merger in the NAFTA agreement that just cost us $20 billion in Mexico will cost us another $40 billion when they get done stealing it. That merger, of course, in the NAFTA agreement included Mexico, Canada, and the United States into a large financial bloc, if you will, taking apart and pulling down all of the barriers relative to trade. And of course, when you have two nations that are running considerably below us and behind us economically, it does nothing for the United States other than take jobs and money out of our pockets. All the baloney that you hear from these characters talking about the positive aspects, we're already 20 billion to the negative with Mexico within the first 30 days after the signing of that agreement. So we've already got to do a lot of catch-up to make sense out of the NAFTA agreement. That was part of the plan in '76. To continue with Harlan Cleveland's statements to the United Nations and to the Congress, in 1976, he also, as you can see here, called for the establishment and control of the wealth of the oceans and the seabeds, which is another story. They are doing that profusely all over the United States. All of the surrounding areas, they're tightened up now to where it's almost impossible, as it is in small businesses of all types, it's almost impossible for the small fisherman to go out and genuinely make a living any longer. He must be part of the big program or he is out of it. They also called for a provision for international control of the weather at human command. And a little later, I will get into that, mind-boggling bits of pieces of information, of evidence that at this point in time, that is a reality. The creation of a world police to keep the peace when it is threatened and to restore it when it is broken. Well, the world police, of course, the obvious peacekeeping efforts of the UN, that is the world police. The police across the United States, additionally, are being militarized in every nook and cranny. We will point those out to you in a few minutes, some mind-boggling efforts taking place to, in fact, create a United States police force, not a localized police force, but a United States police force. As we sit here today, and this is February of 1995, a bill has been introduced on the floor of the Congress as of this month to create a 2,500-man hit team, I would refer to it as, a specialized group of police directed under Janet Reno herself. And this would literally, when you merge that with what is presently known as the police agency interfacing that's taken place, when you merge the two of them together, you would have an entire standing army for Janet Reno and or the president separately under their command, with the alcohol, firearms, tobacco, the FBI, possibly even CIA, which they do interface with them, and that program would constitute an entire standing army for the Attorney General and the President of the United States. The additional paper war that they're pulling on us is amazing. Again, as you can see here with this little bit of information, after the 1961 disarmament program to put us under the United Nations. You can see here at a point in time 30 years later that the United Nations now is calling for global gun control, which is amazing. Additionally, some of the other more bizarre bits and pieces in terms of the reality of the attack on the United States citizenry is, of course, what I would refer to as the militarization of our police forces. They're slowly moving in, as you can see here. This is shows you in Fresno, California, where the SWAT team, which is part of the regular police force, stopping vehicles and searching people, they're now wearing full military fatigues and carrying machine guns on their side. This is in the United States, in Fresno. Additionally, as you can see here in Everett, Washington, the police forces all over the country, and this is a good example from Everett, are now receiving armored personnel carriers. This is the sheriff's vehicle that you're looking at right here, which is an armored personnel carrier, and the folks that are training on the left side, those are not military personnel. That is the sheriff's department for Snohomish County. Our understanding is that they have 2 of these units now, as well as several helicopters available close by that they can utilize. In Bay City, Michigan, the police have been supplied with hand grenades and grenade launchers and CS gas, which the CS gas, of course, is what they use to murder everyone at the Waco scene. Unbeknownst to many people, the Waco invasion, they actually utilize CS gas that, when it is ignited, instantly becomes cyanide. So what they did was introduce that into the building, cause it to be ignited it, and it then turned instantly into cyanide gas. Most everyone in that building, the 17 little children that were actually younger than 18 years of age, some of them, a couple of them were not even named yet, infants, they were all dead of cyanide gas. Those that ran out of the building in 2 or 3 directions were shot, systematically shot down. To get back additionally to the expansion of the militarization of our police forces, in New Orleans they are now carrying on what they call sweeps, where they are using actually part of the military helping them in some places. In Chicago, they're doing the same thing, as you can see from some of these pictures we're showing you right now. Clinton has additionally called and gone into other areas to eliminate your constitutional rights. Bill Clinton has put together, as you can see here, he wants unlimited monitoring capabilities for monitoring your phone calls, your faxes, and your email through your computer system. And one of the most outrageous statements I've heard in a long time came from the head of the FBI, Mr. Free, the newly established head under Bill Clinton. He said, "We are trying to combat too much privacy in the wrong hands." Too much privacy in the wrong hands, folks. What does that mean? What does that mean in the United States of America? I'm not sure I understand. What also are they doing in terms of expanding the militarization of our police forces? There presently is a bill. Amazingly enough, the title of that, the number of that bill is 666. That bill is running through the Congress, has passed Congress. It will probably pass the Senate. That is a bill that totally eradicates, for all intents and purposes, the Fourth Amendment. They've bit into the Second Amendment by taking away your guns. They're now biting into the Fourth Amendment. This Bill 666 calls for the search and seizure of your home, your person, your property, or your business in any way, shape, form, or manner that's deemed logically appropriate by the local police. They do not need a warrant, according to 666. This bill, coincidentally, was authored and presented to the floor of the U.S. Congress just a week or so ago here in February of '95 by Bill McCollum from Florida, who coincidentally was a person that I was the candidate for Congress against in 1990. I ran against Bill McCollum in 1990 on the basis that he was running a corrupted congressional office, supplying and assisting Oliver North's programs with actually the bringing on mercenaries, hiring mercenaries onto the program in his office in the Congress, and which is the most outrageous, illegitimate use of the congressional office I could imagine. He did that back in the 80s. When I found out about it, I was in his district and I ran against him for U.S. Congress, knowing that he was running a corrupted office, and now he presents possibly one of the most flagrant attacks on the Constitution of the United States with Bill 666. Fortunately, in Congress, recently, there's at least had been a few bills introduced that may slow down some of the New World Order. But I'm not sure. There is a bill titled 125. This is to turn around the ban on the assault weapons. Now, what I believe is probably going to happen is that'll fall to the wayside and, in fact, probably not pass. There is a bill that was introduced by, I believe, actually Dole, which is a little bit of a surprise, but Mr. Dole, along with Jesse Helms, introduced Bill number 5 from the Senate side at the beginning of this year's 1995 legislative year. And that bill, which was, I'm sure, had something to do with the American Patriot movement, that bill actually would, in fact, slow down our participation in the United Nations and back off the UN and back the UN, our forces away from the UN activities. Again, unfortunately, that bill, I have a feeling, will probably fall to the wayside. The militia of Montana, which is pursuing, for the most part, the assistance across the country to assist and help the creation of patriot groups and militia groups. Militia of Montana is now moving in such an expanded growth that it's almost impossible to handle it. The militia presently sends out probably something in the neighborhood of 40 packages a day to people across the country that are, in fact, trying to put together a militia group or a patriot group of their own and to expand the knowledge to the average folks that do not know what's going on, and to also expand the knowledge as to what you might be able to do to protect yourself in the future from the one world socialism and protect your family and their well-being. We will have another separate presentation that is available. We have presently over 40 videos and 40 books and pamphlets that are available for those of you that would like to find out more on either side of the fence in terms of protection and assistance for your family. But we will have more of that, and we do have those available presently. The size of the problem in terms of how big the New World Order, one world government socialism is also rather amazing. Not only here in the United States, where I will shortly show you live documentation and footage relative to foreign military equipment in the country. It's all over the world. In Australia, there's a huge patriot movement started up there with militia groups. Their printed material and the information that they have that they're making available to their people is really bewildering. When we first saw it, it was amazing because it looked as if it would have been written and or printed right here by the militia of Montana. The information shows, for example, that presently the government is suppressing the people. They are sidestepping the Constitution of Australia. They are moving into a new world, one world government. They are, in fact, taking the guns and the weaponry away from the citizens against their Constitution, same as they're doing here. They are expanding and taking property away from the people of Australia, the same as they are doing here with this huge land grab and United Nations biosphere parks and that type of wetlands, unconstitutional grabbing of people's property, which is going on. They're doing it in Australia. They're doing the same thing in Canada. The Canadians are likewise doing land grab, if you will. On one hand, they are suppressing weapons, any type of weapons, and they're moving to a point where even to discuss the possibility that the government is carrying out illegal covert operations against their people, as in a New World Order, one world government. They're moving to where that's even going to be illegal shortly in our neighbors to the north. So the problem is international in scope, because that's exactly what it is. It is a one world government. It is a New World Order being pressed on the entire world. When we talk about some of the steps, the variety of steps that have to be taken by these characters, that's a big question we get all the time, is how many things are they going to do to us before they finally pull the plug on Americans? Well, it's pretty well been agreed. We've gone over what their list is. We can watch and check them off as we've gone down. Previously, a few years ago, we've talked about that there was a need on their side of the fence to put us into the one world government, that they would, number one, need to complete a thing called GATT, which, as we said, is already completed. They plan to do NAFTA, the merger of us and the Mexican and Canadian governments. That has been done. They planned and would have had to created a one world army that now has been done and moved to the forefront under the UN flag. They have planned, of course, the financial deterioration, which they've done on several fronts, which we could list, and we won't go into that too in depth today. They additionally plan to two more things that have to be done probably before they really move on Americans. That is the national identification cards and ID systems. The ID system, of course, they're moving with that as we speak. As you can see from this picture that you see, they are moving forward with the suggestions to move into the national identification structure. They're already doing the ID system with the military. As you can see here, the Department of Defense is already doing a system and now presently running those cards into the system. Also, as you can see on this next one up, we're constantly getting folks that are asking us about the injectable transponders for use as an identification. If you can look at this particular picture, you see that there's a gentleman on the left. This is in Israel, where they are presently utilizing the national ID system there. He has an electronic gun, a responding gun in his hand, and what he's doing there is just pointing this gun at a handful of workers that have come across the border. Now, these workers do not have to even remove their identification out of their pocket, because they do have already the electronic transponding card system. And this transponder will send back all the information necessary into that little gun that fellow's pointing at them. He is standing 4 or 5 feet away. This actually can even be shot through a wall and can pick up the electronic transponders. As you can see in this picture, this is actually one of the transponders themselves. This is only the size of a grain of rice. This picture that you're looking at, that shows the transponder next to a dime. And this can physically not only be introduced into a card, as it is presently done in Israel with the folks that you just saw, but this can also be injected under your skin on the back of your hand. In Sweden or Switzerland presently for the last couple of years, there's been 6,000 volunteers utilizing this injected transponder under their skin, and they're using it not only for their full identification system, which of course can be monitored from afar, but it also actually functions for them as a money, cash, and debit system. So they can go to the grocery store and run their hand under the scanner at the grocery store and actually pay for their food. Unfortunately for these characters, they seem to like it. They think it's a wonderful idea. It's obviously very easy to handle. If you do not have to carry any money whatsoever, that's pretty neat. Now, people have spoken up lately at the beginning of this new congressional year, and when some of the changes were made in Congress, and of course everybody got excited on the onset because Thomas Foley had been removed from the Speaker of the House. And of course we got Newt World Order Gingrich. Newt Gingrich, unfortunately, is not going to be much of a salvation. in 1990, Newt Gingrich put together bill number 4079. Bill 4079 is very interesting. It was stopped. That was the year that I was running for the United States Congress. When I found out about it, even though there were several people signed onto it at that time, I contacted a few friends of mine in the Senate and the Congress, told them about the bill, and they did finally get it tabled and pulled aside. It did not pass. But the Bill 4079 in 1990, done by Newt Gingrich, created a call for a national emergency for a period of 5 years. The national emergency for 5 years could potentially have moved into martial law with the suspension of the Constitution, of course on a temporary basis. And it included all, if not all, but a tremendous number of the material that they ended up putting into the crime bill 5 years later and 4 years later in the recent crime bills. It included, for example, the creation of prison camps inside military bases. As you can see here, that's presently underway. Not only did it call for prison camps, it called for the use and application of tents in the middle of the desert, if necessary, for incarceration centers. It also called for the elimination of the habeas corpus, where folks that may be in prison or whatever the case is, to try to chase after appeals and certain changes and alterations on their indictments or their imprisonment. That presently is now a separate bill being presented on the floor of the Congress. So what they have done, even though that bill was stopped in 1990, this whole long list and the amazing possibility of a martial law and the actual national emergency on the basis of crime is now, of course, been taken from that bill and brought forward into new crime bills. So Newt Gingrich, I'm afraid we need to possibly just keep an eye on him. All we've had with the changing of the power now is a changing of the guard. We have, as we try to impress from the militia of Montana, what we have in the United States is, in fact, good guys and bad guys. And you have to bring it down to that point. Forget about talking about a congressman being a conservative or talking about liberal. Forget about Republican. Forget about Democrat. That's baloney. We go strictly on the basis of what did this character do last year. Did he vote on a GATT trade agreement that was unconstitutional in nature? If he did, as far as we're concerned, he's a bad guy. If he's interested in passing unconstitutional laws that are going to deteriorate our Constitution and put us into this one world government, and they're going in that direction, if he's passing those bills, voting on those laws, he's a bad guy. End of story. I don't want to know what he is. Whatever he wants to label himself becomes a moot point to the militia and the patriot groups across the country. Take him out of office. Go to the next opportunity you have to vote and get him out of office if he's voted for an unconstitutional act. End of story. Because every little bite that these guys are doing on us is bringing us closer to the end of the free America, the Republic of America that we originally had 200 years ago. As you can see, we have Newt Gingrich back in 1990 passing or attempting to pass Bill 4079 and outlining, if you will, some amazing concepts, one of which was the creation of military prison camps on the military bases for civilians. Well, now that's pretty spooky, because obviously you get back to thinking about 1941 and 38 in Germany. But then there's an awful lot of things going on in the United States that fits that bill. Amazingly, as it may seem here in the United States, as you can see from the document that you see in front of you right now, exactly what Newt Gingrich had originally laid out, and that was for the creation of civilian prison labor camps, is now underway in the United States of America, as you can see from this document. This document is actually out of the U.S. Army. Was put together a few months ago, back in 1994. Presently, Fort Dix, which was previously a major military training center in a few different areas for the Army, that has already been converted, does already have civilian labor
prisoners there presently. Several others that are being created. Matter of fact, as you can look here at this footage, you can see actual live footage of a huge civilian labor camp. This happens to be a federal camp that is called a transfer center. There are thousands of small cubicles inside this building. This is in Oklahoma. As you can see from this footage, it's really profuse. I'm going to let that run for a bit so you can see what's involved there. This is one of 3 such bases and type units. They're being constructed in conjunction with airports. One of them, which is being done in Pollock, in the Mississippi, Alabama area. This particular, it's Louisiana. This particular one was $80 million construction grant. 3 of these special bases are actually being done in conjunction with airports. And part of the actual paperwork on this says that it would be perfect. They are concealing the aircraft in a manner such that they can offload 747, 737 aircraft without being visually noticed from the ground or from the air. And the paperwork itself says that this would be ideal for separating men, women, and children for transportation to and from other prison points. There's 3 of these bases presently under construction. Additionally, there are 27 bases, Army military bases, planned to accommodate civilian labor camps. And along with the civilian labor camps, there is another 75 major federal prisons underway that will hold thousands upon thousands of American citizens. Well, of course, you can always say maybe it's just an expansion of the crime. If we wanted to eliminate the crime, which of course a big deal for them now is, as an excuse, is the cocaine and the drugs on the streets, if we just stopped the drugs coming in that are connected to the highest level of our own government, we wouldn't need the prisons at all. The intent here of the New World Order is to create chaos, then introduce the solution, and the solution obviously will be, in reality, a lot worse than the original problem. And the solution is going to be, come along with us, take the mark of the beast in your hand, take the transponder identification card, become subservient, take a reduction in your income, spread it out as common socialism is. And by the way, folks commonly don't understand what socialism means. A one-world socialistic government, of course, if you had a huge parliament run by a few people running the entire world, if that could be run by people that had absolutely guaranteed righteous personalities, if these people were going to function, had the personality traits that we use Jesus Christ, and we knew that we could trust them, well, then I suppose it would be wonderful, because everything would be guaranteed, and there would be no murder, no rape, or no drugs, and no criminal activities by the folks at the top. In that case, it would be perfect. A one-world government, of course, would be ideal. But that's not the case, obviously. And, of course, you can't argue the point as to whether there is or not corruption in our government. The government has become a cesspool of liars, cheaters, and thieves. But to get back to the original concept of socialism, which is misunderstood, I'm afraid. You know, some people look at it and they say, well, gee, Bob, socialism maybe is not all that bad because we're guaranteed work, we're guaranteed a place to stay, our children are guaranteed a certain amount of education, not counting, of course, the fact that it would be their education, their controlled education, corrupting your children before they even get into first grade. But that argument is actually not correct, because what happens in real socialism, in the normal function of it, is that a small group at the top, which is our new one world order people running it from the elite top, that group would have control and ownership of maybe 85% of everything. The other 15 or 20% is what we at the lower level get to split up and equally distribute among the rest of the peons. So that is, in fact, socialism working at its best. And that is a limited control of a few folks at the top and everybody else spreading out and sharing whatever's left. And we talk about their education. I talked briefly about it earlier. They literally are planning. There are books being presented presently at the Head Start programs funded by the federal government, That's the programs of preschoolers before they're even 5 years old, before they've even gone into regular grade school. 3 of the books are homosexual in nature. One of them's called Daddy Has a Roommate, and another one is Heather Has Two Mommies. And these are like Golden Book type presentations to 4-year-olds introducing homosexuality. Well, that's part of your New World Order, folks. We're not supposed to look down on anybody, but I darn well certainly don't want it introduced to my grandchildren before they're even in grade school. As far as I'm concerned, and this is being done straight out of the Bill Clinton White House, that's disgusting. There's no other word for it. And when you present that garbage at the Golden Book level, I used to read Golden Books when I was a youngster, and it was see, spot, run, for crying out loud. That's how I learned to read. I certainly don't need Heather Has Two Mommies. That's serious trash being brought into our schools, and that's your New World Order. That's what you have to look forward to. So let's get back to the other problems. So we have these amazing prison camps now. These prison camps are being constructed all over the United States, and they're being presented and put into Army configurations. So right away, you got to say, what's wrong with that? It's like the armament of our police officers being armed with military materials and equipment. I'm going to show you a brief tape here. Right here, you'll see a little bit of footage. This will amaze you. This is some of the elite SWAT team. Go to look at these characters. Well, this is really something. As you can see, these guys are these are the guys that are supposed to go in under extreme stress emergency configurations. These guys are dancing around their own rap tune. Watch this for a minute.
Now we're kicking it live. We're gonna rock the mic. Gonna bust it right. Face down, ass up. That's the way we like to come. Oh yeah. Pose.
Have you ever been out on a date with a chick and the only thing was on your mind was sex? What do you do, 31? Get down on it. How you doing? Get down on it. Go 14, 21. Get down on it. Break down. Get down on it. Once again. Get down on it. Get down on it. Now. Get down on it.
That was pitiful.
Well, so much for that stuff, I guess. That's in a case of an emergency, you may not want to dial 111. It's sort of like just turn on the local rap station, and these guys will crawl out from under the rock and come over and dance in your front yard unless they decide to just kick in your door. Part of the one world army that they're creating, not only the external army under the United Nations, which is dragging in our people all over the country, our military, but they also have a neat little plan. It's called Partnership or Bridge to America, a partnership program. Now, this program is amazing. As you can see from this document here, this shows what they're going to do in reality is take members of the local reserve, the reserve units, the National Guard. They will fly them, ship them to Russia. They will fly Russian military into your local National Guard locations. Just like it kind of gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling inside, as now we have the Soviet military taking over our own National Guard locations, and our own National Guardsmen are out of here, and they're in Russia. You can see from this document right here, it's just another one of their ridiculous steps forward in their one world army. Additionally, they're creating, as you can see here, the United States Police Force. This fits into the bill that's presently on the floor to create the 2,500-man team for Janet Reno. It's kind of amazing. I don't know what the United States Police Force is supposed to be. Well, it sounds, and unfortunately, extremely familiar. It appears to me that, in fact, what we have is the SS that we had in 1939 in Germany is now being created in the United States. We had gotten our hands on an amazing document a little while back that fits into this. They're utilizing the federal emergency management agencies to regionalize and assist in this expansion of militarization of our police forces. As you look at this particular little FEMA chart, which is interesting, it shows Colorado as almost a pivot point or a communication center point, if you will, for different regions where they've broken down the regions of the United States of America, the states, into little regions. This certainly fits into a world parliamentary concept that goes back, as we talked about, 20, 30, 40 years ago when this was laid out by the elite financial characters. This map shows Colorado as the heart of the whole communication center. Well, now that's interesting because we had a situation in Denver. They've just opened and or about to open a $4 billion airport in Denver. I don't know if I was down in Denver a few weeks ago and it did not look like they would ever be able to qualify, certainly not now, for that size airport. However, the airport bumps adjacent straight up connected to the huge, or one of the hugest, largest Army arsenal points in the United States of America. The property lines actually run along with each other. They actually butt right up to each other. That's interesting. And I think with the looking at this particular map showing Denver as a heartbeat of America, if you will, that in fact the correlation between this brand new, outrageous, very highly technically filled airport probably has something to do with your future in the New World Order. Well, the other questions that we get all the time is how would they ever go about really pulling the plug on America? What would be the final steps that they would have to do? Well, one thing, as we mentioned, they're doing the paper war on us. They're passing bills and slowly, progressively putting everything in line. They will be doing the national identification card. They will have completed almost everything necessary. Now, more than likely, the most likely situation that's going to develop is that we will have what will probably be some type of and I will use what their quote will be, it'll be an international terrorist act of some sort. We will very likely see a artificially perpetrated a bombing of a city, a big bomb, or the poisoning of water systems, or some outrageous act that will be blamed on international terrorists. Now, what they will do at that point in time is formally declare a national emergency. We will get one of these fellow American speeches from Bill Clinton. They will then declare martial law to go along with that. And as if you see from, as you can see now with this paperwork that you see in front of you right now, this is in fact a bill that was passed, excuse me, not a bill that was passed, it was an executive order that was created by Bill Clinton and signed in last year, '94. This bill is the entire necessary paperwork for martial law in the United States of America. They get to confiscate property, confiscate even your bandages, your tractors. They get to take complete control of all resources, food delivery, goods, materials that could even be converted into food, and it even specifies that if it can be eaten by an animal, they can take it. It also shows total control of all water, of course, water, power, and all food systems at all. This is, in fact, all the paperwork necessary. Now, what they're going to do when it comes time to enforce it, they will by that time have sufficient amount of weaponry in the United States pre-placed, if you will, that will be some of its Soviet material and German material, East German and the Soviet bloc weaponry. At that time, that material will be here and will be enough of it so that when they fly in the extra manpower that will come from the Eastern Bloc and from Russia, the Soviets, they will then have all their equipment already here pre-planned. Now, as you can see from this this next little bit of footage, this is possibly some of the most amazing, upsetting footage that you're going to see on this video. At this location, you see 1,500 pieces of chemical and biological weaponry. These are reconnaissance units that are utilized along with the T-72 Russian tanks. This material you're looking at right here is ongoing footage. This is all located down south presently mostly in the Louisiana area. These are reconnaissance units for chemical and biological weaponry. If you can get a look at this, it's amazing. This goes on and on. If you'll notice, half of them or some of them now at this point in time have been painted the friendly United Nations white. These units are supposedly were brought in, according to the people involved, to be repainted and then shipped out again. which of course is ludicrous since it would cost you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 each per trip, one direction over and another $5,000 to ship it back. And I guess on that basis we're to believe that there just is no paint in Europe, that they could just paint these and then ship them wherever they plan to go with them. These are brought in to be used in the United States. Additionally, if you'll notice here, this is a picture of a T-72 Russian tank. These Russian tanks are being brought in all over several ports of the United States, Florida and Mississippi. These photographs are taken, this one was in Texas at an Exxon gas station. This T-72 tank is, as I say, being brought in. There are thousands upon thousands of these tanks in Mexico, which they brought in under everybody's nose, right in front of everybody a short while back. The amount of military Russian equipment in Mexico, just across the border, is mind-boggling. But we also have mind-boggling pieces of equipment here. If you will notice now on this next little bit of footage, this will show you Russian short-range Frog missiles. These missiles are, matter of fact, this is live footage. These are photographed in several different places also in the United States. These missiles are good for only 50 miles, folks. They are chemical, biological, or nuclear. They have a 50-mile range. They are in the middle of Texas and Tennessee and in other areas. You have to ask yourself, what is all this Russian equipment doing here? Now, if you'll notice in this picture here, you can see 100 flatbeds of Russian United Nations tanks and equipment that was brought into Montana several months back. This next group of pictures will show you Russian missiles, missile launchers, and other land military units. You can see here we got several pictures. We'll give you a chance to look at these. These photographs were taken in Bay City, Michigan. This equipment is coming in and is arriving all over the United States. In a minute here, I'm going to show you a picture of a Russian Bear bomber photographed by our people in Louisiana. This is the largest Russian bomber in the world. This is the biggest bomber on Earth. Guess what they're doing while they bring in this Russian equipment on a regular basis, expanding the amount of it and stashing this. They're hiding this away in a variety of locations. Guess what they're doing at the same time with ours? As you can see this picture, which is not very clear, but nonetheless it's fairly presentable. This photo will show you that they are in fact cutting up our B-52s. These are $27 million each. They are chopping them into pieces in the desert. The lower half of this picture shows the ones that have already been cut. The upper top part of the photograph you can make out are the ones that are in line to be destroyed. While they bring this tremendous amount of tanks and armored personnel units into the United States from Russia and the Germany, they are also throwing our tanks into the ocean. You can see here with this picture shows one of our tanks being pushed off. They're doing this to several thousand, whatever the numbers are. These is what I would refer to rather an expensive fish tank. These are worth probably $8 or $10 million, even as used units. But the last thing they need is anyone else in the United States, like American patriots, to get their hands on them. Those are going into the ocean while they bring in the T-72 Russian units. When you put all this together, obviously, it gets to be pretty spooky here. We're talking about thousands of pieces of military equipment coming in. We're talking about the creation of prison camps, labor civilian camps inside military bases. We're talking about secret bases. There are underground facilities. We are aware of some 50 underground facilities in the United States right now. Some of them as large as 25 acres underground, and maybe even larger. We do have some photos of those. Unfortunately, they don't come out very well, so we're not even going to bother showing you any of those right now. We have an interesting statement that fits into all of this. There's an extremely outspoken Russian politician. He's well, maybe the equivalent of the Speaker of the House in Russia right now. Some of you may be familiar with him. I cannot pronounce his name. If you can read it on this picture that we're going to show you here, the particular slide up here of the out of the newspaper. Zhirinovsky, I believe is the way he pronounces his name. This fellow has made an amazing statement that may be the reality, even though he's maybe considered a radical Russian even. He's an extreme, a Russian that wants to hold to his homeland. He's extremely stout on the old hardline Russian side of the fence. But he makes an interesting statement. He says, "We will not gloat when California joins Mexico, when a Negro Republic is created in Miami, and when the Russians take back Alaska, or when America dissolves into a commonwealth of new states." And that's where this little map comes in that we showed you here relative to the new configuration under FEMA. Or that the factories will close down and there will be no medicine, no food, and you Americans will immigrate to Europe, Japan, and Russia. Now, he made this statement in conjunction with an appearance of his own at the proletariat in Russia. And it was to news representatives. The spooky part about that is, I suppose, maybe he knows something that we don't know. I think he may be speaking of planned situations. And speaking of plans, as I had mentioned earlier, I'm going to show you here where the Gorbachev Foundation, which is now functioning full-time in San Francisco. For those of you that did not know where Gorbachev had gone or disappeared to, old Mikhail is running his show, if you will, in the Presidio base in San Francisco. As you can see from this paperwork, as a matter of fact, this was done by Senator Cranston. He was the one that set up and did special, actual congressional paperwork to permit the Gorbachev Foundation to move in and function in Frisco. He did some fancy footsteps, and he now is, of course, functioning as a co-chairman of the Gorbachev Foundation. And in the book that we talked about earlier on this video, in the exposure of the United Nations, in that particular book, it spells out 40 years ago, the gentleman wrote in there and he said, one person you have to be very aware of is that Mr. Senator Cranston is a communist working towards the New World Order, one world government. And that was 40 years ago. As we speak, he is in San Francisco with the Gorbachev Foundation functioning full-time. So again, we get back to where the folks are constantly liking to point a finger at us and calling us or referring to us as the conspiracy freaks. If it was planned and organized and put together by people 30, 40 years ago, right after they created the United Nations, to do what they're doing to you today and to your grandchildren next year, it's not a conspiracy freak. That is a conspiracy, folks. Open up your eyes and let's find out what's happening. And it's time to call these people on the carpet that are continuing the movement into a one-world government. The rest of the footage now, I want to show you a few other bits and pieces of some weaponry. I'm going to give you a moment here to watch that. And then we're going to have some real fun with some of the police actions that have been taking place here in the United States recently. I mentioned to you earlier that, in fact, the police agency are being supplied with military equipment. Well, in Puerto Rico, one of the hot spots, which is sort of it's part of the United States, but it's far enough away so that mainstream media can kind of stand at arm's length. I'm going to show you some amazing footage, because what they're doing there, which is what they're doing in Fresno, and they're doing it in New Orleans, and they're doing it in several, like in Chicago, and they're expanding this all over the country. I want you to watch this footage here. As you will see, this is taking place just a few months ago in Puerto Rico. This is, in fact, the equivalent of martial law. They're utilizing National Guardsmen. They're hammering doors in with no warrants whatsoever. They're doing full sweeps. You see some of the amazing little pieces there, the old black helicopters landing and offloading military personnel. They're going door to door, slamming people down in the dirt, taking them over, and I want you to watch some of this. This is amazing footage.
All hell broke loose. It was like Bosnia. We thought Puerto Rico had broken out into civil war.
And Pistol 45, we are here to protect.
They never presented a single search warrant or arrest warrant to anybody.
2 states that are requesting information of what we're doing, and we're going to explain to them what we are doing in Puerto Rico.
People would ask them, why are you entering my apartment? What is your warrant? They would say, this is my warrant.
You know, folks, all of this, of course, is mind-boggling and amazing bits and pieces of information, particularly to somebody that may or may not be up to steam on some of this goings-ons and the direction of the New World Order. Again, there are several questions that always come up. You always have folks, of course, first off, they find it hard to believe that people of their own government would do this. But, you know, it's documented, as we've mentioned and shown you here. It goes back a minimum of 40 years, or 35 to 40 years, at the creation point of the United Nations. The intent all along from day one, according to published material 40 years ago, was to put us into a one-world government, wipe out the sovereignty of the United States, wipe out your opportunity to bring your children up in what you were brought up in. And that's our concern. The militia of Montana's biggest interest is to let people know. So we encourage you to take this tape and bring in as many folks as you can and share it with your friends, share all of our materials, bring people on board so that they understand what's happening. And as a matter of fact, I want to show you a couple other amazing little bits here. Again, we mentioned in terms of the international scope. On this particular little bit of footage here, I want you to notice this is done in Germany. I'm going to let this one run here. This is done in Germany, German news report, and this was the United Nations practice overseas. And interesting here, they interview the officer, and in fact, he denies that they're practicing for any strange activity. This was done about 2 years ago.
Measures to assure peace include gaining and maintaining air superiority. Since the start of the war in Bosnia, German troops have been seeing more of such exercises. In this maneuver, they join U.S., Belgian, British, Italian, and French soldiers.
I resolutely deny any allegations of involvement of the Bundeswehr in UN missions and hostile actions.
Additionally, I wanted you to be brought up and realize, be brought up to speed, if you will, and to realize when folks say they can't imagine that the government would do this, they come forward now and tell us that they were doing secret radiation tests on thousands of people 10, 20, 40 years ago. And we accept that. And they say, well, gee, sorry about that. We did this. We didn't tell folks. We gave little children this. We did this to adults. We did these. They did gas experiments. I want to show you a few little bits of some footage relative to some secret experiments that they were carrying on then that they now come forward and admit, and we, of course, accept it. But when you tell people that they're doing things right now that are totally bizarre, totally un-American, completely unconstitutional in nature, and moving us into this one-world government within the next 5 years, when they plan to have it done by the year 2000, people still find that hard to believe. Do you have to have it done to you so you can look back in retrospect 10 years from now, in the year 2010 or 2005, and look back and say, oh, look, this was when they started to do what they've done to us now, including full monitoring, your ID cards, confiscation of property, total socialism in the United States. Do you have to look back at it 10, 15 years now, from now, and look back at it and say, gee, they were right remember when we saw that videotape and a guy was talking about all these activities and we didn't pay attention to it? Today is the day to become activated and contact us at the Militia of Montana. I want to show you some more footage that'll probably surprise you. How far can our president go as he's done all these executive orders we've been talking about? He told the press, I believe it was in November of of 94, just prior to the elections, he told the press, Bill Clinton said, if I have too many problems with the new Congress, being outnumbered is what they were making reference to, I will run the government by executive order. What's wrong with that picture, folks? He is doing that every opportunity he can. And what do we get? We have no checks and balances. They now, the Senate and Congress, when they hold up their hand and say, hold it, we want to look at this, we don't want to do it, he says, I'm sorry, I'm doing an executive order and I'm going to step around you. Who needs the Senate and who needs the Congress when they are running the government by executive order? Now watch this little bit of footage. This is really unique. This is 6 congressmen in front of the White House several months back. They were doing a peaceful demonstration. They joined some other demonstrators. Bill Clinton had them arrested. It's a little bit of news that you may have missed. I'm going to let you see that. Is that amazing or what? The other amazing bits and pieces that people find hard to swallow, when we get talking about things like electronic weaponry, the electronic monitoring system, the capabilities of our satellites, which now circle the globe. There's so many up there, I'm surprised they don't even run into each other. Some 30,000 pieces of space junk floating around up there right now. The point that relative to the amazing advances in electronics falls into several areas. Number one, the weaponry. They now have full-time lasers on aircraft, helicopters, and other units, and also ground forces, where they've been testing lasers. These lasers now have the ability to blind a crowd by just scanning right across and just blow the eyeballs right out of the average crowd. Pretty disgusting. This is some of the electronics we have to worry about, not counting the fact that they can, in their satellites that are circling the Earth right now, they can hone in, zero in on a license plate in the Kmart shopping center and come up with that license tag and actually read it and turn it into the police agencies. Here, if you'll look at this, you'll see where one of our guys actually came across what is, in fact, a secret laser base where they are, in fact, working on some of the electronics. But let's go into one of the more outrageous bits of weaponry in the United States and Russia. Now, at this point, we're not sure, in fact, not sure who's pulling the strings on this one, since they brought the Russians in, all the way in, as a matter of fact, to our highest level security bases, where we store our plutonium at this time in the United States. Some of the underground facilities where it actually requires a palm scan, where you put your hand down on a scanning system to get read and be admitted into this particular bases. They've already brought them in and relabeled under Russian supervision, or at least in their cooperation. They've relabeled the plutonium as property of the United Nations, and now permitting the Russian high brass, if you will, into some of our most exclusive bases. That's being done. Bill Clinton did another slick one actually only a few weeks ago, at the beginning of March, or excuse me, the beginning of February. Bill Clinton removed the keys from the nuclear retaliatory strike force on our submarines. They've been taken from the commander and put into a vault on board the ship, on board the submarines. However, the launching keys for a retaliatory or protective strike, nuclear, from our submarines have been taken away from the commanders, put into a safe, and the safe now can only be opened by receiving a special coded message that must come from the president. So not only are they destroying some of our weapons, they are restricting the activities of some of our weapons, while still bringing, of course, more weaponry into the United States from Russia. Let's get back to the strange possibility of laser and electronic control. If you will remember earlier in the tape, I pointed out that back in 1976, that there was, in fact, a fellow that came forward on the floor of the Congress in congressional record and listed the mandates and the actions that the New World Order would take to put us under one world socialist government. And I pointed out that one of the 10, 15, 12 different points that were made at that time was control of the weather at human command. Now, normally, those of us like myself that are over 50 years old, that sounds like Buck Rogers, Space Rangers kind of talk. The reality, however, is that recently, only in the last 2 months, we at the Militia Montana have put together a sufficient amount of documentation and evidence that absolutely certifies that earthquakes and major storms and weather control is now being done as a weapon is being done by someone, and we're not sure. We don't have a handle on whether it's cooperatively being done between Russia and the United States, or if in fact it is being done so singularly either by Russia or the United States. But as you can see now, I'm going to show you some of the documentation. This is the first time this has been put together on any videotape at all. Originally, I would not have believed this. I had heard about this many years ago, that they had the ability to do this, and it's a sound wave, electronic sound wave, very low frequencies, etc. I believe that the possibility existed, but we did not talk about it because we did not have enough documentation. And at the militia of Montana, we're real bugs on that. If we feel that we can verify an event or an action or something, we'll talk about it. And if we don't think we can, then we'll stand down from it and stay away from it until it has been verified. Now, here's what took place. I had discovered this book that you see right here, which is a United Nations publication that's available to you. And inside of it, it listed conventions, major conventions done by the United Nations in the last, whatever, I guess it goes back all the way to the beginning almost of the UN, which would have been approximately 1950 and 48. I noticed, I found and discovered in there that there was a particular convention that had been held by the United Nations in 1977, and it was a convention that was titled the Convention to Prohibit the Military or Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques. And I said, wow, so in 77, they actually held an entire convention relative to this problem. So I started doing some snooping, and I contacted the United Nations, and at that time I was doing some work for a congressional office, and so I just added it to my research on their behalf, and I notified the UN that I was trying to find this convention, and I talked to a lady there. She told me, well, she said, I've looked it up, and it does not, we don't have any information on that. Which I expected, because that would be general public domain information that they probably would not want in the public domain. So I told her if she would do me a favor, I told her that I knew the date of it, I knew the name of it, it did exist. I said, would you please go and take the extra effort on the behalf of one of our congressional offices and dig out this material? She said she would. And in 2 days, she called me back, and she said, Mr. Fletcher, we found the information. So I said, great. I said, send it to us, if you will. And I also asked her, how do I get certification to make sure that, you know, the validity of this? She said, turn me at that time to the legal department at the United Nations, and they sent me complete legal certification, which you can see on the screen right now, these two different pieces of paper. Matter of fact, if you'll notice, one of them is in English and one is in French, which gives it a bilingual certification, I suppose. So we then did a little more snooping beyond that point, and I had talked to some friends earlier in Denver, Colorado, that had information, they said, relative to this weather control. When I touched back with them, they said, well, certainly, for one thing, what we have is the entire copy of the patents for the equipment that was done in '87. That's complete documentation, not only on the means by which they can create earthquakes and create and control weather in the atmosphere, but the spin-off from it also is the advanced advanced laser guns and equipment and how they can do that. And it's all in, and as you can see here, these are the copies of those actual patent papers for the patenting of the equipment. With that under our belt, I still continue doing some, if you will, flipping over of rocks. And we did find out then that in 1977, the same point in time when the United Nations was concerned with it, that there was in fact subcommittee hearings in the United States Congress on weather control. All right, so they've done, and then afterwards, my understanding is that there were secret meetings that went way on past that. And as you can see from this other newspaper clip that we're going to show you right now, that in fact Senator Claiborne Pell, who is in the part of the Senatorial Foreign Relations Committee presently, Claiborne Pell several years ago did this amazing little story, and it says in fact that if we do not control it in one way or another, that everyone, both Russia and ourselves, will be doing the weather modification and using it as a weapon. So now when we go back and you realize that in the last year, there literally have been hundreds of earthquakes in several parts of the United States. They're not even reporting all the earthquakes that are taking place in small, varying sizes from very small to very large. And you look at the quake that took place in Kobe, Japan, and you look at the weather controls that had created floods up the Mississippi and flooding and droughts in other areas. You look at Ethiopia, where originally, matter of fact, I must point this out, in Ethiopia where they're having a drought and they've killed 7 or 8 million people have died unnecessarily within the last year in Ethiopia. And the famine that's taken place. Part of a plan done by the New World Order advocates many years ago specifically specified that by the year 2000, to maintain proper control, there must be an eradication of billions of people from the face of the earth in one way, shape, or a manner of another. And that took place several years ago in the 80s, and it was called the Plan 2000. We have 5 years, and they will be at the 2000 point. This also, I want to show you this, talking about weather control. This is an amazing picture of an unusual type of a lightning that was actually photographed in Montana. And I will pass on to you the bizarre experience. As you can see also, I'm going to show you briefly here is a reference to the blue beam experiments, which is related to this very same equipment. The folks in Washington State have been talking to us in Montana on a regular basis. They kept telling us that they're having these blue beam events taking place, this blue beam electronic weather-controlled elements taking off and blasting in the sky in Washington State. And I believe it was the 13th of February, we were in Washington. We did a couple of presentations, myself and the Trockmans from the militia of Montana. We were all over there. When we drove back, it was through an unbelievable snowstorm that actually was a snow emergency for Seattle area. And on our way back, we actually saw one of these blue beam experiments. It blasted off right in front of us. I have no idea it was on the horizon, if you will. It was that far away, so we don't know specifically where it came from. With a blue beam that shot up, exploded exactly like the picture that you can see on the screen, and then illuminated the entire horizon in almost a very light peacock blue, if you will, and it was already almost dark. And you want to talk about the militia of Montana becoming believers. Unfortunately, with all this documentation, what we do have is the reality of weather control as a weapon. And you can do devastating things worldwide when you can control the weather. Now, people say to us also on a regular basis, they say, well, gee, Bob, you know, you guys, you can't tell us that the Soviet is some kind of a threat. They've fallen apart. Why would, we're talking about bringing Soviet material and equipment over here, weaponry here, and the possibility of some kind of a big merger between the United States and Russia under this UN globe and this huge one world conspiracy. They say, well, gosh, socialism, communism, and the idea of power structure up there at the highest level in Russia, they've fallen apart, Bob. What I ask you to do is ask a person in Krasnaya if they feel that they are no longer being threatened by the Russians. Krasnaya is not even a Russian state at all. It never was. They are not Russians. They were taken over many years ago and occupied by Russia. What they did was a mistake. What all of the naysayers here are doing in the United States, they've made the mistake of believing that garbage, that in fact the Russians no longer have a power hold or an intent to expand their power. That's a con job. And what happened when the Chechnyans came forward and said, okay, we take you at your word, you no longer want to be a power structure, good, get the hell out of our state. And when they did that, the Russians said, oh, no, wait a minute now. We meant we're not going to do this and this, but we're not going to allow you to become a separate state. And they've gone in, as we all know, and killed everybody they can and bombed the pudding out of that place and turned it into a complete rubble. and they're destroying it. And when they realize now that they have hardly anything even to win at this point, they even went down in the last few weeks in February and destroyed the rest of municipal buildings, etc. It's kind of like, you know, if we are not going to really win this like we want to, so let's just wipe out everything, and that's what the Russians have done. So when the people tell you that they've fallen apart and they no longer have any adventurous concepts of moving their power beyond their border, that's a con job. Don't believe it. It's got nothing to do with reality. As you can see here, I'm going to put up a picture of the Chechnyan patriots, the Chechen militia. And if you think this little group of Chechen patriots fighting for their own individual liberties, you think they've caused a lot of trouble for the Russians, which they have, wait till the New World Order challenges patriotic Americans on our own ground. It's going to make the Chechen resistance look like a practice event at the Boy Scouts. God bless America. Contact us here at Militia Montana. If we can help you with a group, do it. Do it now. Your life insurance now has to be the maintenance of sufficient weaponry to protect yourself and your family, sufficient food for yourself and your family for a year stored away, and now you have your life insurance. From that point forward, we can spread the information. We can work through the normal political channels. We are not cultivating any kind of an uprising, but be warned, the United Nations, one world government, will not take the United States of America. They will not take the American patriots, and you better watch out, because we're not going to put up with it any longer. Thank you.
Let me make sure that you understand I'm not here representing the NRA. I'm not even a member. Okay? Secondly, I'd like to say that in your opening statements, you commented specifically on my testimony, saying that basically it had nothing to do with this issue. And I had to chuckle, because then I noticed you had Mr. Brady up here, who was hit not with an assault weapon, but with a .22 caliber revolver. So getting beyond that, I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I don't hunt. I personally abhor hunting. But I was given a gun by a friend when I was 21 to carry in my purse for self-defense, and I was taught how to use it. A couple of years ago, my parents and I went to a cafeteria in Texas on a bright sunny day. We weren't in a dark alley where we weren't supposed to be. And as you all know the story, this madman drove his truck through the window, and he began shooting. Well, immediately, my father and I got down on the floor and put the table up in front of us. And this guy kept shooting. And you're thinking, what, you know, what could it be? Is it a robbery? That's the first thing that generally comes to mind. And he keeps shooting. It took me a good 45 seconds to realize that this man wasn't there to commit a robbery. He wasn't there for a hit. He was there to simply shoot as many people as he possibly could. Now, I'd like to make something clear. I hear all this talk about how many bullets can go in a clip. I've been there. I can tell you it doesn't matter. It takes 1 second to switch out a clip. You can have 1 bullet or 100 bullets. It doesn't matter, guys. I've been there. He goes, dump, dump, just like that. That's not enough time to rush a man, I promise you. When I finally realized what was occurring, I thought, I got him. And I reached for my purse. He was maybe 12 feet away. You know, is it possible my gun could have jammed? Sure. Is it possible I could have missed? Sure. But I can tell you I've hit much smaller targets at much greater distances. But then I realized that a couple of months earlier I had made the stupidest decision of my life. I took my gun out of my purse and left it in my car. Because as you well know, in the state of Texas, it's sometimes a felony offense to carry a gun in your purse. I can tell you that I'm not mad at the guy that did this. As he continued, it was obvious that he was a madman. My father, at that point, said, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. He's going to kill everybody in here, and he rushed the man. No way. The guy turned, shot him in the chest. He went down, was obviously mortally wounded. For whatever reason, that made the man change directions and go off to my left. Shortly thereafter, someone at the back of the restaurant broke out a window. When I saw what looked like an opportunity to escape, I turned around and I grabbed my mother by the shirt and I said, come on, we've got to run, we've got to get out of here. And then my feet grew wings and I was out the back window. As soon as I got out, I realized that my mother had not followed me out. And as I learned from the police officers, she had crawled over to where my father was and cradled him until the guy got back around to her, put the gun to her head. She looked up at him, put her head down, and he pulled the trigger. My parents had just had their 47th wedding anniversary. She wasn't going anywhere. As I mentioned, I'm not really mad at the guy that did this, and I'm certainly not mad at the guns that did this. They didn't walk in there by themselves and pull their own triggers. The guy that did it was a lunatic. That's like being mad at a rabid dog. I'm mad at my legislators for legislating me out of the right to protect myself and my family. I would much rather be sitting in jail with a felony offense on my head and have my parents alive. As far as these so-called assault weapons, you say that they don't have any defense use. You tell that to the guy that I saw on a videotape of the LA riots, standing up on his rooftop, protecting his property and his life from an entire mob with one of these so-called assault weapons. Tell me that he didn't have a legitimate self-defense use. Just one final statement. I've been sitting here getting more and more fed up with all of this talk about these pieces of machinery having no legitimate sporting purpose, no legitimate hunting purpose. People, that is not the point of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not about duck hunting. And I know I'm not going to make very many friends saying this, but it's about our right, all of our right, to be able to protect ourselves from all of you guys up there.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
When your ears refuse to hear, you turn your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear, as if you should not look at your reflection in the mirror. How can I explain to you when you won't understand? You scoff me and you mock me and reject the truth at hand. You spread your vicious rumors all across this troubled land. You willfully and knowingly transgress from his command. Your mind has been made up for you by people you don't know, whose thought machines control the scene so well it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain, knowing that your eyes are blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why do I feel so all alone, like I'm the only one? Even though your eyes are open, they may never ever see. Your mind may never comprehend this sinful simple subtlety. Your heart may never hunger for the truth that sets you free. Your soul may know the darkness of divine eternity. Like petty thieves who plunder in the shadows of the night, they break inside and enter through the windows of your mind. How can I control this poisoning of the soul? These lies that blind your eyes, blinded by the lies. Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Thought machine controls the scene so well it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain, knowing that your eyes are blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Have your
The world can therefore seize this opportunity to fulfill the long-held promise of a new world order, where brutality will go unrewarded